Alright, so if you're just starting out with the Exploration Toolkit, then you'll probably want to know how to set up your scenes inside of Unity. So here I've just got an empty scene where we just have a little test environment here. And the first thing we want to do is add in our player. Now, you can of course go ahead and add in your own custom player controller. You'll simply need to integrate it with the input manager we are using, which can also connect to your own input system. So if you're using something like Rewired, you can easily create a module that plugs into the Exploration Toolkit input system. So down in the project browser, we're going to go to Core, Prefabs, Player Controllers, and you'll see we have both a blank and a complete player controller. Now, the blank player controller basically has just the player controller itself. So if we drag it in and open up its children, you'll see it just has its head and a player components prefab here. Whereas if I drag in the complete one, this is going to have all of the main systems: inspecting, picking up, interaction, crosshair, camera focus. So if you want all of these systems integrated, then you can simply drag in the complete one. For this example though, we're just going to drag in the blank. So we'll drag in the blank player controller here. And then if I go ahead and press play, what you'll notice is we're actually going to get an error. And that is because we haven't added in the input manager that is required. So the input manager, if we go over to Core, then Prefabs, Managers, you'll see we have an input manager and then an input manager old input system. So at the moment, the toolkit supports both Unity's new input system and the old input system, and you can read more about it here in the component information. I'm going to drag in the input manager, which uses the input actions, and we should be ready to go. Now, I did mention before about if you're using your own input system, you can simply create a module script, as I've created here for the new input system, which interfaces with the input manager, and you can go to the documentation to learn how to set that up. But essentially what we can do now is press play, and we should see that everything works nicely. And as you can see, we can now walk around with WASD, look with the mouse, run with shift, and crouch with control. Now, for a more advanced game, you're probably going to want to use a custom player controller, which you can also refer to the documentation on how to set that up. But it is a pretty straightforward process You simply just need to connect to the input manager's events. So now that we have our player controller inside of the scene, we're going to go over some other useful prefabs you might want to add. While inside of the managers right here, what we're going to do is look over at UI Manager and drag that in. Now, the UI Manager essentially is an event manager for UI related things, such as toggling on and off all the UI elements. For example, when we inspect an object, we want to disable the HUD so that we don't have our inventory and other UI elements in the way. So that's what the UI Manager is useful for. Again, it is optional. Another optional prefab you might want to add is the global audio source. Now, the global audio source is basically a way of playing a sound in your game. It plays a sound with a 2D spatial blend, and this makes it so that you don't need to have an audio source reference for everything in your scene, okay? Little items you might want to pick up, you just want to play a sound in your headphones or in your speakers. You don't necessarily want to have 3D spatial audio for everything, and this is just a singleton that allows you to easily do that. Now, there is also another handy prefab here called the Exploration Toolkit Manager, which contains all three of these. So I can delete the Input Manager, UI Manager, and Global Audio Source and just drag in the Exploration Toolkit Manager. And this contains all of those prefabs here, along with the Navigation Marker Manager, which registers navigation markers so they can be rendered on in-game or on a minimap or on the compass bar. Now, let's have a look at our player controller here. You'll notice that it has a player components prefab, and this right here is where we are basically referencing all of the different systems. So you'll see here in the inspector, we have interaction controller, pickup, inspect, inventory, camera focus, crosshair, because different systems require references to other systems. For example, the inventory requires a reference to the pickup controller, because when we equip an item from our inventory, we'll be doing that via the pickup controller. So if we go over to our core prefabs folder again and go to controllers, you'll see all the possible controllers we have here. So let's say we want to add in crosshairs to our game. Well, we simply drag in the crosshair controller. It doesn't have to be a child of the player, but I just like to do that for consistency. And then what we can do is select our player components, and you could just drag and drop the crosshair controller into its field here, or you can click the find button and it is going to automatically find it right there. Now, if we press play, you'll see that we have the crosshair all set up, and there we go. Now, this is a dynamic crosshair, so it will be able to change based on what things we are looking at. If we're looking at a door, it might show a little door icon. If we're looking at an inspectable, it'll have a little magnifying glass. You can, of course, set that up however you like. Now, this is really just the basics of what you'll have in a scene. If you want to implement picking up objects, you'll drag in the pickup controller. If you want to inspect stuff, you'll drag in the inspect controller. And each of these have their corresponding settings that you can, of course, change in the inspector here. And we'll be going over those in future videos.